The first thing I saw when I pulled into my driveway that afternoon was a cloud of dust drifting across my lawn. The second thing was a backhoe tearing straight through the flower beds my late wife planted 10 years ago. And standing there, sipping an iced coffee like he was watching a golf tournament, not the demolition of someone else's property, was my neighbor, Ethan. Now, I need you to understand something before we go any further. I am not the kind of person who starts trouble. I'm 56 years old. I teach history at a community college outside Asheville, North Carolina. I like a quiet life. I mow my lawn on Thursdays. I drink cheap beer on the porch on Fridays. I've lived in that same cedar-sided house for almost 20 years. I know every crack in the driveway, every bird that uses the feeder out back, every shrub my wife and I put in the ground together on weekends when we were still figuring out what kind of people we wanted to be. So when I say I was angry, when I tell you what I felt in my chest standing there, watching those hydrangeas disappear under the tractor wheels, I want you to understand that the anger didn't come from nowhere. It came from 20 years of that place being mine in the truest sense of the word. And it came from the sentence Ethan said to me when I walked over to ask what the hell was happening on my property. That sentence, the one that changed everything. He said, "Besides, you weren't really doing anything with it anyway." That sentence is where this story actually begins. Ethan had moved into the neighborhood about a year before the backhoe incident, after buying the old Whitmore property at the end of the cul-de-sac. From the second the moving truck showed up, everyone knew he was going to be that particular kind of neighbor. You know the type. Loud without realizing he's loud. Friendly in a way that somehow still feels like a performance. Every conversation turned into a story about venture capital or crypto or private schools or some resort in Cabo he just discovered. He drove a matte black Range Rover that had never once touched actual dirt, wore those tiny expensive sneakers that certain wealthy men favor, and somehow managed to make the act of carrying groceries look arrogant. People tried to like him at first, the way people in neighborhoods try to welcome someone new. My next-door neighbor Diane baked him banana bread. Old Mr. Hargrove offered him the number of a reliable local handyman. Ethan barely looked up from his phone during those interactions, and after a while folks just stopped trying. Then came the renovations. For almost 10 straight months, there was always something happening over at the Whitmore property. A pool, then a stone fire pit, then an outdoor kitchen with a stainless steel pizza oven that probably cost more than my first car. Every weekend there was another delivery truck blocking half the street while Ethan stood outside with his architect, talking about expanding the entertainment footprint. I remember saying to Diane one afternoon, "At this point, he's one infinity pool away from turning the place into a boutique hotel." She laughed. But it bothered people, and not because he had money. It bothered people because he acted like the neighborhood was simply scenery arranged around his life, that we were background detail, not actual human beings with our own histories in this place. Still, none of that was my business. People can spend their money however they choose, even foolishly. None of it crossed my property line, until the afternoon it did. I've been at campus all day, faculty meeting in the morning, office hours in the afternoon, the usual Tuesday rhythm. I turned onto my street around 4:30 in the afternoon and noticed the dust from about 100 yards out. By the time I pulled into my driveway and got out of the truck, I could see the spray-painted orange lines crossing the grass on the side of my yard. The torn earth where someone had already dug out nearly 15 feet along my fence line, and the backhoe sitting in the middle of where my wife's garden used to be. My brain actually resisted processing it for a moment. The scene was so fundamentally wrong, the kind of wrong that shouldn't be possible in a world operating by normal rules, that I had to stand there and let it settle before I could move. Then I noticed the hydrangeas, flattened into the mud like they had never existed. I walked over to the nearest worker and asked, as calmly as I could manage, what was happening. He looked immediately uncomfortable, pointed toward Ethan, and muttered that I should talk to the homeowner. Homeowner. The word landing on my ears in the context of my own yard. Ethan spotted me walking over and gave me this casual, easy smile, The smile of a man who has never once had to adjust his expectations because reality pushed back against them. He didn't take his sunglasses off. "Hey, Martin, little construction day over here." I looked past him at the framing stakes driven into the ground. My ground. "You guys are on my property." He actually chuckled. "Not according to the updated survey." He pulled a folded document from under his arm and tapped it with 2 fingers like he was presenting corporate evidence. "Turns out the original property lines were off by a few feet. Happens all the time." "Ethan," I said, "that land's been part of my yard since before you were old enough to shave." He shrugged. "Well, now it isn't." And then, "Besides, you weren't really doing anything with it anyway." "I want to tell you," I responded calmly, "I want to tell you I maintained my dignity completely in that moment and said something measured and wise. What actually happened is that I stood there looking at the crushed flowers and the broken bird bath my wife had picked out at an antique market in Hendersonville, the one she'd laughed about the whole drive home because it weighed about 40 pounds. And something settled into my chest that I can only describe as deep, patient, cold fury. Not the kind that makes you do something stupid immediately, the kind that makes you very, very focused." Ethan gave me one last smile, nodded toward the construction behind him. "Don't worry, Martin. Once the patio's finished, it'll look a lot better than those bushes ever did." I went inside. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the backhoe and the dirt flying and those flowers disappearing. Maybe that sounds dramatic, but when you've lived in a place long enough, your home stops being property. It becomes memory, compressed into physical form. My wife Ellen planted those hydrangeas the summer before she got sick. We used to sit beside them in folding chairs in the late afternoon, drinking sweet tea while the cicadas screamed from the trees. Hearing Ethan dismiss that space as some useless patch of dirt he was improving by covering in stone, yeah, that stayed with me in a way that the simple trespass alone wouldn't have. Around 2 in the morning, I got out of bed, went downstairs, and pulled the old lockbox from the hall closet where I keep all the house paperwork. Deed, tax records, insurance documents, survey maps, everything going back to when my Uncle Walter sold me the house after retiring from the city planning department. I spread it all across the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and went through it page by page while rain tapped against the windows. The more I looked, the less Ethan's story held up. According to every document I had, the property line hadn't changed in over 30 years. There were old county maps, utility sketches, handwritten notes from the previous owner. Everything matched. Everything told the same story about where my land ended and where the Whitmore property began. The next morning, I drove to the county clerk's office carrying a folder so thick it looked like trial preparation. The woman behind the counter, Carla, recognized me. Small towns are like that. She pulled up Ethan's revised survey on her computer, frowned, and turned the monitor slightly toward me. It had been filed the previous month by a survey company out of Charlotte. It looked official at a glance, but when I leaned in close, I noticed something immediately wrong. The updated line wasn't straight. It curved inward near the side yard, in a strange little arc that just happened to give Ethan exactly enough room for the oversized patio he was building. It looked less like a legitimate property line correction and more like someone trying to squeeze furniture into a room that didn't fit, bending the line just far enough to make it useful. Carla gave me an apologetic look. "You can dispute it, Martin, but these things take time." Time. That was the problem. Every hour that passed meant more concrete getting poured into my yard. When I got home that afternoon, the patio foundation had doubled in size. Workers were carrying stone slabs through what used to be my garden. That evening, Diane came over with a casserole because apparently my misery had become visible from the street. She sat at my kitchen table while I vented for almost an hour. At one point, she said, quietly, "My husband used to say people like Ethan only understand consequences." That line stayed with me after she left. Consequences. I sat with it for a while. Then around 9 o'clock, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My Uncle Walter. Walter had retired from the city planning department in the early 90s, and the man never threw away a document in his life. When he sold me the house, the attic still contained boxes of old records, blueprints, permits, zoning maps, stacked like archaeological layers. I had never seriously gone through most of it, but I was desperate enough to look now. I pulled down the attic stairs, grabbed a flashlight, and started opening dusty cardboard boxes while insulation drifted around me like snow. For nearly an hour, I found nothing useful. Old tax receipts, faded neighborhood plans, correspondence that belonged in someone's family archive. Then I opened a long flat tube tucked behind the air vent in the far corner. Inside was a full original infrastructure map for the entire subdivision, dated 1987. Water lines, gas lines, sewer access corridors, easements, every inch of underground utility placement carefully marked in red and blue ink by someone who expected this document to matter for a very long time. I unrolled it across the attic floor and froze. Running directly beneath the strip of land Ethan had taken, not near it, not adjacent to it, directly and precisely beneath it, was the city's primary sewer access corridor. I could see the line clearly on the map, traced in blue with dimensions noted beside it, running exactly where Ethan was currently pouring a luxury patio foundation. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it. Most people don't think much about easements. They know the word in a vague way without really understanding what it means in practice. But here's what it means. The city doesn't own that strip of land. You do. But they have unconditional, permanent, legally ironclad access to it whenever they need it for maintenance or emergency work. And the condition attached to that access is absolute and non-negotiable. You cannot build permanent structures over an active utility easement. No foundations, no concrete slabs, no luxury outdoor kitchens with built-in wine coolers and gas lines. Nothing that would prevent a city crew from getting underground access on an hour's notice if a pipe burst or a line failed. Sitting there in that dusty attic holding a 35-year-old infrastructure map, I understood for the first time exactly what was going to happen to Ethan's beautiful new patio. I also understood something else. Whoever had approved his permits, if they had been properly approved at all, had either never checked the easement records or had assumed nobody else would. Ethan had bet everything on the assumption that a history teacher living alone in a cedar house wasn't going to dig deep enough to find the thing that would cost him everything. For the first time since this whole mess started, I smiled. The next morning, I went into full documentation mode. I located the original steel survey pin near the back corner of my property, measured every inch from the old marker to Ethan's new patio framing, and photographed everything from 6 different angles in different light. Then I scanned Walter's easement map into my computer, highlighted the utility corridor in yellow, cross-referenced it against Ethan's revised survey documents, and printed copies for every relevant department I could identify. City utilities, zoning enforcement, public works, the emergency sewer maintenance division, and 2 others whose jurisdiction I wasn't entirely sure about, but who might care. By Friday afternoon, I had left so many voicemails that I probably sounded unhinged to anyone reviewing them. But I had documentation. Clear, dated, professionally produced documentation that had been sitting in my attic for 35 years, waiting for exactly this moment. That same evening, Ethan was hosting a cocktail party beside the half-finished patio. Portable heaters glowing, servers carrying trays of champagne and shrimp through what used to be my garden. At one point, Ethan raised his glass at me from across the fence with the specific smug grin of a man who believes the outcome has already been settled in his favor. That look said everything. You lost. Go back inside. This is how the world works for people like me. What he didn't know was that Monday morning at exactly 8:13 in the morning, 3 county trucks were going to pull into our cul-de-sac and introduce him to consequences. I was standing at the kitchen window with my first cup of coffee when the first truck rolled up Monday morning. I watched Ethan come outside smiling because he actually thought initially that the city had arrived to admire his renovation. That smile is something I will carry with me for a long time. Then the second truck pulled in behind the first, then the third. One said public utilities. Another said zoning enforcement. The last one had county infrastructure services printed down the side in giant blue letters. By the time two inspectors started unloading tripods and measuring equipment from the back of the trucks, Ethan's smile had completely and permanently disappeared. I stepped out onto my porch just as one of the inspectors walked over and asked Ethan a very simple question. "Sir, did you receive authorization to build over a protected municipal easement?" Ethan blinked. Twice. His brain appeared to need a moment to reboot. "I what?" The inspector opened a folder, pulled out one of the infrastructure maps I had submitted, and pointed directly at the patio foundation. "This entire section sits over an active sewer access corridor." Ethan immediately switched into corporate negotiation mode. "There must be some misunderstanding. My survey team cleared this." The inspector's face didn't change at all. "Your survey team does not supersede city infrastructure maps." Even from 30 feet away, I could feel that sentence land. Over the next hour, the inspectors crawled over every corner of Ethan's property, measuring distances, checking permits against original specifications, marking sections of freshly poured concrete with fluorescent spray paint. And the deeper they dug, both literally and figuratively, the worse the picture became. The patio wasn't the only problem. Part of the new pool deck crossed into the easement corridor as well. So did the gas line feeding his outdoor kitchen, which had been run without proper clearance from the utility corridor. One inspector shook his head while reviewing the build plans and muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath in a tone that suggested he had seen a lot of bad planning in his career, but this was a particularly vivid example. At 10:30, they posted a bright red stop work order on Ethan's back door. Construction halted immediately. The music shut off. Contractors started quietly loading equipment into their trucks without making eye contact with anyone. And Ethan lost the composure he had spent the entire year projecting. He cornered one of the inspectors near the driveway and started demanding names, questioning authority, insisting someone had made a clerical error. The inspector finally cut him off mid-sentence. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. If there's an emergency sewer failure under this structure, the city has full legal authority to tear through your patio without compensation." Silence. Total silence. Even the contractor stopped moving for a moment. Ethan looked like someone had hit him squarely in the chest. The confidence, that specific, expensive, impenetrable confidence he had been wearing like a second skin since the day he moved in, was simply gone. Over the following weeks, everything unraveled faster than I think even he anticipated. The city issued a demolition order for the entire patio structure, along with major sections of the pool surround and the outdoor kitchen installation. Everything built over the easement corridor had to come out. All of it, regardless of cost, regardless of the quality of the materials, regardless of how much the custom stonework had set him back. And because he had already committed to high-end finishes and custom foundations, the demolition and reconstruction costs were extraordinary. Word around the neighborhood put the total damage, engineering assessments, contractor fees, legal consultations, permit corrections, and reconstruction, somewhere in the range of $400,000. I can't confirm that number, but I don't have any reason to doubt it. Then the HOA got involved. Ethan had never obtained final approval for several of his modifications because he had assumed nobody in the neighborhood was going to push back against someone with his resources. That assumption turned out to be expensive in a second way. The HOA began issuing weekly fines for the violations they had been sitting on. Violations he had been counting on his construction timeline to outrun before anyone organized against him. Suddenly, the neighbors he had spent an entire year ignoring were showing up to HOA meetings in numbers, just to watch him argue with the board. Diane leaned over to me during one of those meetings and whispered, "This is better than Netflix." She wasn't wrong. Then something unexpected happened. One evening, maybe 6 weeks into all of this, there was a knock at my front door. When I opened it, Ethan was standing on my porch. No sunglasses, no designer jacket, no performance of casual wealth. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like the stress of the previous month had physically added years to his face. "Can we talk?" he said quietly. Just that. I almost said no. Part of me wanted exactly that, to send him back to sit in the mess he had made. But I thought about what my wife used to say about anger, that if you hold on to it past its useful point, it eventually starts consuming you too. That bitterness is a fine tool for getting things done and a terrible thing to carry once the work is finished. So I opened the door wider and let him in. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had spread out paperwork in the middle of the night trying to find something, anything that would help me fight back. He admitted the truth almost immediately, and to his limited credit, he didn't try to dress it up. The revised survey wasn't technically fabricated, he said. He had hired a consultant known for aggressive interpretations of property boundaries. Someone who specialized in finding just enough technical ambiguity to justify what a client wanted to do. He knew the line was being pushed. He figured if construction moved quickly enough, the project would be finished before anyone could effectively challenge it. And honestly, he told me, he had expected me to back down. I was just some older guy living alone. He said that out loud. He said it the way someone says something they hadn't fully heard themselves think until it left their mouth, and then sat with the silence that followed. I really did think money could smooth this over, he said. That's the problem, Ethan, I told him. People who've always had money start believing consequences are optional. They start thinking the rules are for everyone except them. And the first time they meet something that doesn't respond to a checkbook, they don't have any other gear. He didn't argue with me after that. We sat quietly for a few minutes, and then he stood up, shook my hand, and left. A couple of months later, the house went up for sale. Ethan took a significant loss just to get out from under the remaining repairs and outstanding fines. Last I heard, he had moved to Arizona for another startup. The developer who bought the property tore out the rest of what had been built incorrectly and rebuilt everything to proper specifications. The city, as part of the cleanup process, installed permanent steel boundary markers after re-verifying the original survey lines. My property line was formally restored in the county records. The hydrangeas are growing back. Not all of them survived. Some had been too thoroughly crushed, the root systems too damaged to recover, but enough came back. By the end of that first spring, there were new green shoots coming up where the mud had been, pale and tentative at first, then fuller as the summer settled in. I sit out there sometimes in the evenings with a beer and look at them. Not every night, just when I need to. The bird bath is back in its spot too. I cleaned it up, reset it on its base, and let it be what it's always been. An ordinary object that matters only because of where it came from and what I remember about the person who chose it. Here is what I have thought about since, sitting on that porch in the long, quiet evenings. This story wasn't really about a property line. It wasn't about an easement corridor or a fraudulent survey or even the money it cost Ethan to learn a lesson he probably should have figured out much earlier. It was about what happens when someone decides that because they have more resources than you, your claim on a piece of your own history is simply worth less than their desire for additional outdoor entertaining space. It was about that specific casual cruelty of someone who has always had money telling someone who has built a life with ordinary means that their corner of the world doesn't quite count. You weren't really doing anything with it anyway. That sentence, the one that changed everything for me, not because it was the worst thing anyone has ever said, but because of what it revealed about the person saying it. The idea that property only matters if you're monetizing it, that the life you have built in a place has no weight unless it's the expensive kind of life. That ordinary people should fold quietly in the face of confident wealth because that's just how things work. What Ethan couldn't have anticipated was that the quiet history teacher, living alone in the cedar house, had an attic full of documentation, a set of friends who showed up when things went wrong, and a wife who had taught him to hold on to what mattered without holding on to the anger past its usefulness. The map had been up there for 35 years. The survey pins were right where they had always been. The law was exactly what it was. Some people mistake quiet for weakness. Some people assume that because someone doesn't fight loudly, they're not going to fight at all. And they're right, often enough that the assumption becomes a habit. But habits are wrong sometimes. And a particular kind of wrong that happens when someone has built 35 years of history in a place, and you underestimate what that history means to them. That kind of wrong tends to be very, very expensive. The hydrangeas are coming back. The bird bath is back in its place. And every Thursday evening, I walk out to that side yard and look at what survived, and what's growing again, and what was worth fighting for. I'm still not entirely sure whether what I did was justice or revenge. I told you I was a history teacher. I think about those distinctions seriously. But I know that the morning those county trucks pulled into the cul-de-sac, and I watched Ethan's face go through the full collapse of his assumptions, I felt something that was less like triumph and more like the particular peace that comes when the world briefly operates the way it's supposed to. Ellen would have thought that was enough. I think she was right. If you've ever had a neighbor decide that your corner of the world was theirs to take because they were confident enough and wealthy enough, and your quiet was something they mistook for permission, I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe, because there are more coming, and I'll see you in the next one.